Hello, everybody. We are now ready and raring to go for our Charity Digital Webinar Day. Thanks again for joining us. We're going to dive straight into it since we're running a little bit behind schedule. But today's webinar is all about sort of new year, new things to think about. Last time out, so 2 weeks ago, Mimi and I were on the other side of the webinar fence, and we chatted about the top 5 digital trends for 2020. And today we welcome back, Teresa from Lightful to talk us through what we can expect from social media this year and how we can plan accordingly. Welcome, Teresa.
Hi, Chris. I'm glad I made it.
So are we.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. We're here to talk today about the social media trends and what 2020 actually holds. And we were discussing with Chris some ideas on what we want to talk as the first webinar of the year in our collaboration. And it felt like a great time to actually look at the trends and also what these mean for all of us. It's not just about looking at the upcoming trends, but also on the practical side of things and how we can make the most of social media this year. So except for the trends and what's coming up in general, we also look at some practical steps, how to improve your social media presence. And we look at some tools and some ideas on how to improve your social media process. And as you might know, social media changes very fast, whether it's your full-time job or if you're just doing it among all other things. It's really hard to keep up because there's so many things to look at. There are so many channels and everything changes really fast. So it's always a challenge to make sure that you know what's happening or you're using the right channels. And this is what we'll try to do today, to look at what's changing and what we need to keep an eye on for the next year. Some stats for those who still might have the challenge of proving the worth of social media, especially to your stakeholders. It's good to remember that 29% of online donors say that social media is a tool that inspires them to actually give. So it's the perfect connection with fundraising. It's also interesting that 79% of nonprofits worldwide agree that social media is effective for online fundraising. So that's pretty much the proof that social media can be a great channel among all other comms tasks that you have. And also good to consider on the other side of things that 35% of charities are using digital but don't have a strategic approach. And this is from the Charity Digital Skills Report. It's useful then to consider how all these trends are useful for all of us, but how can we also be a little bit more strategic or try to improve ourselves a bit? We're going to look at 6 trends today, and this is more like an idea of what's coming up. It doesn't mean that we should dive into all of them. It's more like an awareness of all the things that are changing on social media. The first trend to keep in mind is it's useful to start thinking beyond likes. We tend to look at our posts and the presence on social channels and measure the success in terms of likes. But it's kind of time to go beyond that because it seems that many platforms are considering the idea of moving beyond likes. For example, Instagram is already testing the idea of hiding likes. That means that you won't necessarily know on other posts how many likes they get, so it won't be an indicator of success. There's nothing that's confirmed yet, but it's useful to consider that for the longer term and how you can make your success more future-proof, if you think of that. Another trend that is always happening every year, and it's among the trends that we always talk about, but it's still relevant and it's still important to mention it. It's good to focus on engagement. We all count the number of followers or the likes, but engagement is actually more important in terms of success. You want to make sure that the posts that you're creating, they are engaging, they get lots of likes, comments, shares, because this is an indication that your content really works and it goes very well. And the good thing with engagement, it also has long-term value. For example, if someone keeps liking or commenting on your posts, it means that they really enjoy your content. This means that they have more chances to actually see your posts again and again based on the algorithm. So the engagement is also having the benefits of making sure that this number of people still see your posts. And we know that the algorithm sometimes can be challenging. So engagement can sometimes be very useful on that side of things. Another thing to consider, we tend to hear the question quite often at Lightful when working with charities. How many posts should I schedule or plan during the week or during the month? There isn't obviously a perfect answer or the ideal solution, but in any case, it's always good to consider quality is always more important than the quantity. You don't need to post, for example, every day, or if you feel that I haven't posted for 2 days, I need to talk about something. It's good to remember that if you don't have something to say, then you probably better stay quite silent than just post something that wouldn't get any engagement. It's better to have good posts that go really well and that are relevant for your organization, rather than just trying to post on every channel but not getting any success on that. And we're looking at 3 more trends, some ideas on the future of social media and how you can approach it. The 4th trend is around communities and the idea of public broadcasting that is really changing. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, talked last year on the changing trend of going beyond the public broadcasting, which was Facebook up to now. You're sharing a post and you're just hoping that everyone sees that. But we know it's not really easy to make sure that many people see that. So there was a shift on social media towards the communities. For example, there are Facebook groups that are really growing, or there are the private channels, there are the messenger tools, or even WhatsApp, for example. So there's a changing attitude towards private communities, or at least closer compared to the public broadcasting. And this might be useful for charities if you want to bring your volunteers together, if you want to make sure that your service users have a safe space that they can talk about. And it makes it easier to organize your content as long as you have someone to monitor the communities. Another trend when it comes to social media and thinking of the long-term value, it's useful to see social media as a relationship building tool. It's not just about the number of likes, followers, or just getting a post to go viral. It's important to be patient and look at the channels that have a longer term value for your organization. It's not always easy, we know, on social media to get direct conversions, and that's why many people feel frustrated and they feel that social media doesn't really work for them, which is a fair case. But if we see it on a different perspective and we start seeing social media as the tool that it can bring us closer to our supporters, find out more about their needs and create the right content, then it can have a really long-term value. And another trend that you might have heard, because every time we're talking about social media trends, there has to be something on AI or chatbots. It is a trend, of course. Artificial intelligence is really growing in terms of customer success on every market, but it's also useful to see how charities are getting into chatbots. And it's quite easy actually, and there are many templates and companies to actually help you build a chatbot. But we also need to consider, do we know why we want to build a chatbot? What's the use case and what do the users really need from that? So I'd say it's definitely an interesting trend, and it can be very useful to get closer to your supporters, to share more information about your work and your services. But you also need to make sure that you focus on the user experience. You have a content strategy when it comes to chatbots. And when we're talking about content strategy, it's also important to think of the different type of content. When you're creating content for chatbots, it has to be conversational content. You need to make sure that it aligns with the kind of questions that somebody would ask, and you want to make sure you answer them in the best possible way. So there are many things to consider before creating a chatbot, but it can also be very useful if you're ready to think of the next steps. And after looking at all the trends and just some ideas on things to consider, it's time to get more practical. How can you improve your social media presence in 5 steps? These are more like guidelines on things you might want to work on. You don't necessarily need to work on all of them. You might feel confident in some of them and want to improve some others. The first one is around objectives. You want to make sure that you use social media in a way that you know the reasons that you're actually using every channel. You want to start with a goal. What are the things that you want to achieve on every channel? Why are you creating the specific post? And what do you want to get out of it? And then you want to create the content based on these objectives. For example, do you want to create content that you build your engagement? Or did you just create a new channel and you want to build your followers and get them to keep up with your content? Once you set the goal, then you start thinking, how does my content resonate with that? And how can I make sure that my content also aligns with my organization's objectives. If you want to make sure that you raise more funds and you're focusing more on fundraising, then you want to start being more strategic with social media. How can I build the relationships in order to approach this in a way that will align with everyone's goals? And when setting goals, it's actually good to remember, you want to be ambitious, of course, but you also want to be realistic. For example, if you want to increase your followers this year, if you have 100 followers, you wouldn't say, I want to reach 1 million followers, because chances are it wouldn't happen. Hopefully it would, but of course, we know the chances of that. And it's better to say, I want to increase my followers, let's say 50 new followers every month, and get into small, smart goals that can get you closer to your achievements. But it's also good to be realistic in that case. And it's good to remember, when setting objectives, you can communicate your work and make sure that you share what you're working on with your colleagues. Even if they have nothing to do with comms and social, it's still good to be transparent and trying to find ways how can everyone help each other. The next idea on getting more organized with social media is to work on your content calendar. If you have already a content calendar where you schedule your posts and you plan some ideas ahead, then this is the time of the year to actually review that, to see what's working and what you can improve. If you don't have a content calendar, you might want to think, how can you save time and plan ahead without necessarily scheduling posts every single day? A good idea to get started is to look at some themes that you might have in your organization. For example, one theme could be around raising awareness. Another one could be around recruiting volunteers or talking about fundraising. All these are different themes that they can help you schedule your posts in a way that it's not repetitive. You don't want, for example, 5 posts around fundraising in 2 days, because your followers might feel that you're talking about the same thing all the time. So if you start creating themes, you might be more organized and work on a content calendar that makes more sense for you. It might be an actual print calendar, it might be a spreadsheet, or you might just schedule your tweets directly through a social media platform. Another idea to improve your social media success is around personas. Personas are fictional characters that represent your target audience. So pretty much you just create some characters that represent your supporters. And when you create content, it's actually easier to make sure that you create the right content for the right person. This makes it easier once you get used to that, because you start thinking, would the content make sense for the people that I want to reach? And if you're wondering, how can I get started with personas? I'm not really sure what I know about my followers. You can still start with assumptions. You probably assume that there is a specific audience on Facebook and it might be different on Instagram. And then you can start testing that, see what's working and what you can really improve in the next few months. Another idea on how to make the most of social media is to talk about storytelling, but also storytelling with impact. We all tell stories on social media, and it's a powerful way to use, for example, images and videos to tell a powerful story. But we also want to make sure that stories have some sort of action. They make sure that they focus on the impact and drive the followers towards your website, towards something that they can find out more. So it's not just about telling a great story that they can be engaging and get likes and comments. You also want to make sure that they can find out more. And as you can imagine, this can be ideal for fundraising, because if you tell a great story and you manage to capture your audience attention, you also want to make sure that they can follow up. They might want to subscribe to a newsletter, they might want to go to a donation page, or anything else that you feel that you can get them interested enough to continue the conversation. And when thinking of stories, it's good to remember, it's not about you, it's all about your supporters. So the story should always be on their perspective rather than just saying what your organization is doing all the time. Because this makes it easier for them to connect with you and actually try to find out more and feel that they want to go behind your cause and support it as much as possible. And last but definitely not least, in terms of the ways you can improve your social media presence, is around measuring your social performance. And measurement can be different for every organization based on your objectives. For example, if you want to increase your engagement, you want to focus more on the likes, comments, the engagement rate based on the number of posts. or even the traffic that you get into your website with the clicks. If you want to focus more on your followers, or you're focusing more on the growth of your channels. And it's good to remember, you don't need to make measurement too complicated. When we're looking at analytics, it might be scary and there might be too many numbers and graphs, but it's good to keep a couple of metrics in mind, or some things that pretty much would make sense for your organization, and try to be consistent with them. If you can do it every month, that will be ideal, even just a document for yourself, so that you can keep track of the progress and see what's really changing with your work from one month to another. And now some ideas in terms of tools. And of course, there are many tools that you can try. We're just looking at some different types of tools that are free or at a very low price, on different perspectives on making the most of social media. Obviously, I had to start with Lightful because I'm biased and I'm using it every day anyway. So Lightful is a social media and content planning tool. So if you're ready to work more on what we mentioned around the content calendar and plan your posts, you can use Lightful, and there's a free plan for small teams to schedule your post, find more awareness days and best times to post. You can use Canva. You might have heard of it. It's an online tool to edit your images or just to create new ones. It's very handy because you don't need to be a designer, but there are so many templates that you can just pick the social media channel and get the right sizes and some really great images. And there's also a non-profit discount on a premium plan. So if you want to have a look, it's on their website and it's very handy. Another useful tool is Trello. This is more on the content planning if you have more ideas or if you want to organize your themes. It's also good to plan your campaigns. As you can see, it's very usual. You can actually include images and make sure that you create as many boards as possible. Just make sure that you collaborate with your team. And it also helps you to actually improve the visibility, which is probably important if you're part of a bigger team. Another tool that I really like is Grammarly. There's also a Chrome extension. So you either go to the website or you just install the extension. And it really helps you to improve your writing. It helps you to simplify your copy, which I actually find really useful. Because when you start creating the content, it tells you that this might be more complicated and you might want to change it with different ways. Or you can also learn from your mistakes. You can see the actual errors that you might do more often and how you can actually improve that. So I definitely recommend that. And another one, if you want to monitor your mentions, again, it's free. It's Google Alerts. You just write, for example, the name of your organization or something that you're interested in. I tried, for example, with social media, just as an example. And you can get notifications when there are no new stories, something coming up, or something that you need to keep an eye on if you want to jump. So it's definitely useful, and I recommend that too. And now we're jumping into improving your social media processes. We start thinking of the trends. We looked at some ideas on how to improve your social media presence. Then you probably feel ready with the right tools to get organized. And you're probably wondering, how can I make sure that I add all these to my schedule in a way that's really realistic? Because we all have too many things to do, and social media is not always a full-time job. And you want to make sure you make the most of it with a limited time. So these are some ideas on how to improve your process. This is both on social media, but also on your work in general. What's really useful for me, and I've heard that many people do that, is to organize your time, your work day, into blocks of time. For example, I go on my calendar and I'm starting the day usually by blocking 2-3 hours if I don't have any meetings. And this is the time that I'm focusing more on the most demanding tasks of the day. So when it comes to social media, comms, or anything digital, you might organize the blocks of time with planning, monitoring, scheduling, creating content, or even just measuring the performance of your posts. So this way you feel that when organizing your month ahead, doesn't have to be everything during the week. You can just look and block some time to make sure that you don't miss the time and you forget to do it. A good way to do that is even to block some time for scheduling. If you don't do all these things, you might say every Monday, I'm dedicating 1 hour to schedule some posts ahead. And it's very useful to actually stay organized. Another thing that you probably relate, because it's one of my biggest challenges online, is to manage your attention. It's very easy to get distracted, to go on Twitter or Facebook and spend 3 hours without realizing. And that's the hard part when you're managing social media channels on a professional level. You want to make sure that you have some clear goals on the things you need to do. You need to remember that I need to do 1 to 3 things and that's it. I need to stay away from cut videos or just GIFs on Twitter. And you want to make sure that you start with your most important tasks. If you say, I want to have 10 minutes to look at what's happening on Twitter, then maybe you want to set out a timer and make sure that you do stick to your times to make sure that you're not wasting time. And if you feel that you're working on something that takes longer, it's totally okay to reward yourself with a break. It's good to actually get off your screen, have even 5 minutes off, and make sure that you're dedicating the next task the right attention. And then at the end of the day, as a social media, comms, or digital person, if you feel that you need to ask for help, that you feel something is very overwhelming for you, then feel free to do so. It might be someone else from your team. It might be other comms colleagues to feel that you have a support network, or just to feel in general that you're not the only one having the same struggles. And another thing that we might hear quite a lot is around multitasking. And we know that it's really hard to keep up with all the tasks nowadays, and we always have too many tabs open. But there are also researches that talk about multitasking, how it's not really helping you to be more productive. And where we're doing online and comms tasks, it's actually easy to be distracted and jump from one tab to another. And it gets harder to focus on the one thing you were planning to do from the beginning. So it's good to remember multitasking is not always helpful, especially if you have to do a very important task. And it's more about training yourself to try and focus and pay attention on one thing at a time, and even allow yourself to have some breaks if you want to be distracted. And the last bit for today, when we're talking about making sure that we're more successful on social media in 2020, it's good to get started by setting a goal. It'd be great to have it as a takeaway from today and think of the goals of what you would like to achieve in an ambitious but also realistic way on social media this year. What's 1 or 2 things that you want to make sure that you want to improve this year? And how can you actually make sure that you set some targets and some tasks every month so that you achieve them? Feel free to add this on the chat. And of course, we have more time for questions and anything else that you feel that I haven't answered.
Questions time now. Thank you very much, Teresa. Another great webinar, as always, as expected. Thanks very much for some really good insights. We actually talked about a lot of similar things from a more digital point of view, looking at personalization and the use of social messages going forward. So yeah, some really interesting deep dives into what social can bring in 2020. So as always, it's we do have a Q&A at the end of our webinars. If you wish to submit a question, you can do so by hitting the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. It might be a slightly different place if you're joining us from a mobile device. We have got some come in so far, so we'll start with those. From Vanessa, she is asking, how do you schedule tweets without using Hootsuite?
Good question. Again, obviously I have to mention Lightful. I kind of made it. So Lightful is pretty much an alternative to Hootsuite, but of course there are many tools. It's just picking the right tool and finding what works for you, because sometimes some people prefer the interface of Hootsuite. Lightful is different, it's more minimal. And it really depends on your work schedule and how you feel something works for you. So I usually just try different tools and then decide what works better for me.
In terms of without using the platform, though, you can't schedule a tweet.
I think there is the option of TweetDeck specifically for Twitter, not for every tool. So the tool is called TweetDeck, and it's designed by Twitter pretty much to schedule your tweets. It doesn't have all the functions that other platforms would have on additional things, but if you just want to schedule your tweets, it's still very handy.
Magic, thank you. Julia follows up the AI talk. As big as AI is at the minute, we talked about quite heavily 2 weeks ago as well, and that, you know, it is becoming more accessible for small charities. That's true. But to sort of strip it back a little bit, what exactly is a chatbot and how can charities make use of them?
So the chatbot is usually an automated messaging way to get in touch with someone. So on Facebook Messenger, for example, instead of messaging someone and expecting an actual human being to respond to you, if you feel that you're having some questions asked all the time and you don't have the capacity to answer them, then you're working towards building a chatbot, which is an automated messaging machine, or we could say that. And it's called chatbot because exactly it's kind of like a robot knowing exactly how to reply to you. But of course, there's a lot of work behind that to make sure that you have the answers to all the questions and making sure that you predict how people would get along and actually ask anything you have in mind.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's like an automated version
Exactly.
of the FAQs, isn't it? And what you basically, there's a bit of machine learning built in with predictability, as Teresa said. So essentially, they learn what your audience is asking and what direction to point them in.
Yeah.
So they're being used quite heavily throughout the sector, especially from a service delivery point of view.
Yes, it's actually really useful for service delivery.
Very useful, yeah. And there's a lot of, we covered it, I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but I'll dig it out for the resources. We did cover a good, an article about this recently of a charity using it really well and what they're doing. I think it might be Samaritans, but don't hold me to that. But I'll dig it out. We've got loads of questions coming in now. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll try our best to get through them. Next up from Aaron, do you have any examples of a post that is about quotation marks you and a post that is about in quotation mark them?
Good question. So a post that is about you, meaning your organization, is when you're just saying that our hard work helped to raise this amount of money and saying that we're really working towards changing this thing. This is great because you're saying how your organization is working specifically in your team towards meeting the goal. But for example, when it comes to fundraising, instead of just saying that we're working really hard towards this cause, it's way more effective to actually tell a story. To say, for example, how the actual people would impact from your work and how a specific practical story can really make a difference. So this is easier for people to connect and focus on the supporters, or if it's, for example, service delivery, instead of saying I'm providing mental health services to help people who need it, you just share a story of someone who says how they really found your services valuable and how they highly recommend that. So it's just changing the perspectives and make sure that you focus more on the supporters rather than you.
Exactly. A bit of that altruistic reciprocity
Yes,
is a term that gets bandied about quite a bit nowadays. And that's exactly that. I mean, for someone to part with money for what you do as a charity, that takes a certain level of altruism, and to pay that back by thanking them and making it about them is definitely the right way to go. Next question from Remy. What do you consider useful engagement parameters if likes are no longer the standard?
So in that case, likes would still be around, of course. It's not a case that they would disappear from one day to another. But comparing the number of likes you get to a post with the comments or the shares, it's obviously way more important to look at comments and shares, because even the reactions, because you can still track the reactions, it's an indication that people are not just passively clicking and like a post. They just spend the time to make sure that they liked it enough to mention someone else, to add a comment, to share that, because it feels that they connect more with your content and they want to share that with their friends and their networks.
Yeah, exactly. And what is your take on sentiment? I think a lot of sort of the stuff I've read about recently, in my previous role, we only use sentiment as an engagement factor. I think that works if you've got a massive audience and obviously people are talking about you a lot. But where do you sort of stand on that?
I think it's also very useful if you want to dive deeper into engagement and look at what makes more sense for you. The sentiment, for example, is telling you whether your posts are more positive, negative, how people react to your posts. So if someone gets really angry, or if you feel that your posts are not making your supporters happy and they just, for any reason, they might be angry, there might be no reason at all, but you still need to keep an eye on that. So if there's something that happens, some sort of crisis comes, then you do need to keep an eye on the sentiment to make sure that your posts get better results than just angry trolls.
Yeah. You need to keep an eye on
You don't want that, for sure.
Exactly. Next question. From Lily, sorry for pronouncing that wrong. What are your tips on starting an Instagram page from scratch? the organization where I'm doing my internship hasn't posted on Instagram since 2016.
Interesting. I'm sure that there are many organizations who have similar questions now. You might have started an Instagram account, but you didn't feel very active in the beginning. And now you realize that Instagram is very big and I want to jump back on that. It's totally okay to go back to this or even to create an account, let's say this year. It's more about making sure in the beginning that you have some content to make sure you keep it active. You might want to promote the new channel on the other accounts or on your email or your website so that you make sure that you have some sort of growth strategy to keep it active.
Yeah, it's a good, well-timed question actually, because we're actually going through something quite similar. We had an Instagram that it's got a reasonable following and we posted on it quite regularly, but as time went on, we started not to like the sort of avenue it went down. So we've paused, we've scaled back, and we're strategizing again in-house at the minute to then essentially clean it all up and start again with, you know, a much more cohesive thought process behind it, strategy, a plan. We sort of pulled it back to basics and thought, how exactly, what do we want to use it for? And that pertains to your SMART goals, right? Like you mentioned throughout your webinar as well. So it's about, you know, being able to align it to something and always refer back to what are we doing this for?
Yes, of course. It's never too late though.
Exactly, it's never too late. And even if you have and think, hang on a minute, this just isn't working.
Yeah, sure.
You can always pull the plug and go again. So next question. We have a social media team run entirely by volunteers. So in terms of focus, should we expect them to come up with a strategy for 2020 or should it come from the senior management board? That's a really good question.
I think it's probably a combination. Of course, your volunteers who actually manage your social accounts know practically how to support you, what works better. But you also need the buy-in and the conversations with your senior team because they also know your organizational goals. For example, your volunteers might have a completely different perspective from your senior team. So it's good to have a chat and check the different perspectives and find the middle way pretty much in that case.
I'd agree. It's always good to include them as well. I mean, it's
probably better in the beginning.
If they're the ones on the front line who are posted and always ingrained in it, essentially, you definitely want to be collaborative. Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
That's great. Next question. Aside from just growing our following, what other examples of an annual social media goal can you give? My organization doesn't rely on individuals giving, so keeping a key focus when creating content can be difficult.
Interesting. I'd say the goals don't have to be necessarily around numbers. For example, what Chris just said, we want to go back on Instagram and have a strategy to actually try and keep it active. So it's not necessarily something that's very big or just have social media as your priority. It's more about something that keeps you accountable and from one month to another to think of what makes sense for you. If it's just to look at your current channels, what's working, and even step back, it's still good to review that. It still counts as a goal. It doesn't have to be just numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Your goal doesn't have to be lead generation.
Exactly.
For example, you can use it as a brand awareness tool in that sense where, you know, the likes of these new platforms like TikTok and stuff like that are all about breeding authenticity and personalization. So you can use that to your advantage in collaboration with a number of other marketing initiatives. So social can be your brand awareness that you can sort of layer lead generation activities into depending on what your goals are. But yeah, it can be used for a number of different things other than just driving donations. Next question. From Gemma, you mentioned it's not good to post the same content on different social media channels. How should you tailor your content for each platforms?
So this question comes up quite a lot, and there's always the comment when I'm saying, for example, don't post the same thing on every social channel. There's the comment on the lack of time, which is totally fair when you don't have the time to actually write every single post for every channel. It's more of an observation on making sure that your content makes sense for every platform. It doesn't have to be completely different. For example, Twitter is all about being very specific because you have a limitation of characters. So if you create a long post for Facebook, obviously you need to adjust that in order to make sense on Twitter. And vice versa, when you create a tweet and it goes, for example, quite viral for your numbers, then if you want to post something similar on Instagram, you know that it's very different and you probably want to have a longer caption, you have a nice photo, you want to explain the reason why you're posting that. So it's more about thinking of every channel, even if you have some sort of structure for one post of what you want to talk about, to just change the phrasing a bit or to make sure that it adjusts to every platform.
Yeah, I think that's key because it all tails back to your brand, right?
Yeah.
The way, you've got different voices and tones for different platforms as well.
Exactly.
I mentioned TikTok, for example, before, who they really push this authenticity, sort of all about being fun, a bit tongue in cheek.
I really tried not to include it in the trends.
Yeah.
I'm sure there won't be a question on that.
Sorry. Yeah, exactly. But you couldn't post the same on LinkedIn,
yes, of
for
course.
example.
Yeah, it's very different as a channel.
Exactly, and it's about playing to the strengths of the channel while getting your sense of personalization.
Yes, exactly.
Where are we up to with questions? From Joe, I found lately that if I don't post on Facebook for a day or two, I'm getting bigger reach figures when I do. Is this a documented thing, or am I imagining this?
It's very interesting with Facebook, and it feels like a strategy on its own to try to understand the Facebook algorithm, because it changes all the time. So Facebook is probably the main channel I had in mind when I was talking about quality over quantity, because the algorithm is really focusing on the engagement. So if you post every single day, but you have no likes, comments, shares, anything, so probably Facebook thinks that your posts are not really of good quality to reach all your followers. So they keep reducing your reach, which is already quite low on Facebook, the way it goes. But if you post, for example, twice a week, but you have really good content and they get great engagement, then you have more chances for your reach to actually be higher on the next posts. So it does make sense.
Yeah, I think you are onto something there.
It's good to be there.
We scaled back recently as well on LinkedIn and Facebook in terms of how much we post, and we find we're getting more engagement. But I'm with you. I mean, trying to find how the Facebook algorithm work is like trying to find the Marie Celeste.
You never know what's happening.
You're not going to be able to. It's one of those things, and I think my personal opinion is that the Facebook page is almost dying now. It's
getting there.
it's on its way out, and it's becoming more of the, as you mentioned in the webinar, the community-based side, the groups, and how we can make the most of those. But even still, they're tough to keep engaging, and I think that's a whole other animal that could probably take a whole other webinar, to be honest. Next up, we have a question from Chantel. I find when reviewing Facebook analytics, it features a lot of noise, i.e. 1 week, 28-day breakdown. Which metrics do you recommend we focus on?
I think it depends on what makes sense for your organization. For example, there are some teams that want to keep track of a 7-day performance if you have too many posts, if you're like a big team. But I like the 28-day or something like every month kind of focus, because it gives you an idea of what worked in a solid amount of time and number of posts. But if you feel that even that's too much for you every month, you could still adjust the timing and look, for example, every 2 months.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think the longer gives you a better understanding,
doesn't
it? So it depends, again, what sort of campaigns are you running on social as well. But generally, I think 28 days is a good metric to follow.
Yeah.
Where are we at? Sorry. Next question up from Michelle. There's loads of questions here. Thank you, everybody, for submitting them. Can you explain what Facebook ad checker is?
Facebook ad checker.
Ad checker.
I assume the Facebook ad checker we mean to the process of getting through the advertising and check the quality and everything that's happening, if I'm not wrong.
Sure.
I haven't heard of it as a term, but I assume it's the process of checking whether the Facebook ad is fitting to all the criteria, because Facebook is quite specific with all the guidelines.
Yeah, you appear to have stumped us there. So we'll take a look at that and come back to you offline if that's okay. Next question. Is there any benefit for small charities to engage in paid social? If so, what are the main considerations?
Good question. And it keeps coming up more the last few years, because we see, for example, Facebook is not really growing organically as a page. And it comes to the question, do we need to pay in order to get our posts to be seen? I'd say if you feel that you have the small budget, it doesn't have to be a big budget, to try some things, I definitely recommend that. But it also needs some time or some sort of training to understand what you want to get out of that and how to set the right ads so that you don't just waste your money. it's probably better to start with what you want to get out of that. If it's, for example, a campaign, if you want to recruit volunteers or promote your services, and then think of what you want to get, for example, from your budget. Even with £50, you can still run some experiments. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's more about spending the time on understanding Facebook ads. And there are some good trainings from Facebook if you want to start from there.
Yeah, for sure. We actually, shameless plug here, but we actually have a session at our conference all about making digital advertising more relevant. And it's going to be run by WWF. So they actually joined us for a digital fundraising day as well. And Joe Trigg, who's coming down on the day, has some really good insights for charities of all sizes and how to keep it, how to make it work for everybody essentially, and how to cut through that noise that we've so often talked about. So I would check that out, and if you can make it, do so. There's a question from Beth. There's two questions from Beth Thomas here. We'll ask the first one just because it did tickle me. Is Facebook for old people now?
Great question. And I have to be very diplomatic, I guess, because we're still using Facebook.
Yeah.
I think there is a general research, many research actually, saying that there are more older people using Facebook compared to the past. And it also makes sense because I've realized the other day I'm using Facebook for 10 years now. And people who are now at the age of 17, for example, they feel I want to jump on TikTok. Facebook feels quite old to me and it doesn't resonate to them. So in one sense, yes, it's right. But I think there are still many demographics on Facebook. We shouldn't really just say we want to target the younger ones on Instagram and the older ones on Facebook.
It all depends on your audience, right?
That's true.
And it's kind of depending on the demographics of your audience, so you should kind of sway. But I wouldn't write Facebook off just yet.
Yes, exactly.
I think there's still plenty to achieve from it, but you might want to put more effort into some of the platforms that are more relevant for your captive audience. Next question. So on the back of that, we kind of said Facebook is dying, but not quite yet. So what are some of the other, we've mentioned TikTok, but what are some of the platforms that we should start to focus on? Are there any new players coming?
The new players, I think it's only TikTok really. And everyone is talking about that and it makes sense because it has really grown over the last year. And we've only seen only a few charities trying to test the grounds. I was checking British Red Cross, they started a campaign, I think last month.
Yeah, WF did an Earth Hours thing.
Great. Yeah, so it feels like it's kind of like experimenting a bit and it will probably grow stronger also in the charity sector this year. But it's more again on involving your supporters and focusing on the idea of user-generated content and being authentic.
Yeah, exactly. So UGC is going to play a big impact on what's going to happen this year. But yeah, for me, TikTok, maybe Twitch if you want to include it as a social platform. But Twitch is more on the gaming side of things for fundraising. And if you can leverage that, that's one you should look into. But other than that, I totally agree. TikTok, it'll be, is worth taking a look at this year. Next question from Mike. I would appreciate some suggestions for how to increase reach. I feel we are well engaged with our current followers, but what techniques work to extend the number of people that see our posts?
Is that for Facebook specifically, I assume?
It's more social in general.
Or just in general?
Yeah.
Because Facebook obviously was a question around the algorithm, which is another story.
Yeah.
But in general, on increasing your reach on social media, I think it becomes from understanding your audience, as we said about the personas, and also tailoring your content to what your supporters want to hear from you. So the more you understand what are the posts that work better for you, how can you create more content like that? And also, how can you sometimes adjust the copy in a way that you make it more shareable? If there's something that really makes sense, if it's a great video, how can you encourage your supporters to actually spread the word, share with their friends, and make sure that they bring more people on board? So sometimes playing around with the copy and trying to look at the posts that work better for you and kind of like copy the results in the next ones.
Totally. What I've also found is useful as well, Mike, is partnerships.
Yes, good
and
idea.
Like making digital partnerships online, and to help you reach those new audience. Think of it like a mushroom clouding out, for example, or fishing is another example. If you only fish in one pool, you're only going to reach a certain amount of fish. If you try and get your message to other places or fish in different ponds, that I'm kind of getting lost with this analogy, I think. Then you might catch different types of fish. If that makes any sense, the be surprised. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is that use and leverage partnerships to get your brand and get your message into new audiences. And hashtags are also
yes, hashtags really work. And takeovers on Twitter and Instagram, they also work very well.
It's a really good idea. Takeovers, stuff like that. Next question from Oliver. Just wondering, charities. You mentioned charities using TikTok for fundraising. Do you know any charities that have used this successfully?
I think it's probably too early to tell.
Yeah, I think so. I think we have some articles. If you go on our site, take a look that we posted towards the back end of last year. That I think we covered how Youth Music and WWF are using it. They're very, very, very early adopters, though. So I do expect to see a lot more coming out.
Should be able to see this year more.
A lot more this year, and we'll be covering that as well. So get yourself registered to the new site and take that marketing communications interest, and you'll be getting those into your inbox. Was this the last question? So we are running out of time. I know we did start a bit late, so just so we can let you all go, we'll ask this last question, but we'll ask Therese if she'll kind of stick around. We'll record the rest.
Sure, yeah.
And then we'll add them in as like a bonus to the record. This question, sorry. Last question: how important is video content versus written content? Which is more worth it considering the cost implications of video production?
Great question. I think video content is very important, and it sometimes works very well if you want to tell a story. But as you've mentioned, there's also the case of the cost, but it also depends on the kind of video you want to create. You can just use your phone, for example, if it's just to get some quotes, some ideas from your volunteers and your supporters. But if it's part of a campaign and you want to make it more professional, then yeah, it's more about thinking, how can you justify the cost? And if you do have the resources, if you don't, you can still use photos, which is really visual, and it could still work.
Yeah, I agree. I think social being the nature, otherwise, especially Twitter, you don't have to be super high end from a video point of view. If you're going to push stuff out on YouTube, then that's a little bit of a different story. But for the sake of Twitter, Facebook, would totally recommend using the mobile side of things and live video as well on Facebook.
Yes, exactly. You just use your phone.
All you need is your phone and some good content. I've caught myself saying this quite often recently, that we're all creatures of binge, and that's essentially because we enjoy consuming content. We watch Netflix shows 10 episodes at a time. We listen to podcasts in the same vein. So it's more so for me how you create your content and the quality, exactly. as you rightfully mentioned earlier, than it is about the standard or even how long a show.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I think that wraps us for today. We will hang back and record the other questions as there's a mountain. So thank you very much for being such an engaging audience today. As I said, we'll be adding a recording to our site along with some resources, and we'll drop that all to you via email in the next sort of few weeks. Coming up in the next few weeks, on Tuesday, we have a podcast with the NCSC and Marie Curie, which kind of addresses the cybersecurity state of the nation. We rate how the charity sector fared when it comes to cybersecurity last year, and we take a look at what 2020 holds. We'll also be introducing a brand new game to our podcast series. So I don't know if you're familiar, but we've introduced a new game called Charity Digital or Charity Dodgy. So it's well worth a listen to see how that unfolds. In 2 weeks' time will be our next webinar. We have Microsoft with us, and they'll be doing a webinar on how charities can embed AI in their digital strategy. It'll be a really interesting session with some really good charity case studies, which will particularly highlight how small charities are already using AI to benefit their organizations. Following that, we have our conference, which I've mentioned already. So far, we've got 300 delegates joining us at Olympia, London on the 5th of March. That's 22 sessions from over 30 charity speakers, and which will include some cracking panels as well. We have the likes of Charity Water talking us through digital storytelling, a topic we touched on today, WWF, who I've mentioned, on digital advertising. And we also have The Mix, who'll be sharing their tips on how to work with social influencers. So from a social and marketing point of view, we're going to be covering some great content among a bunch of others. Yeah, the day is all about how charities can be more digital. It doesn't matter where you are on your sort of digital journey, and whether you're just at the beginning and getting kicked off, or you're stuck at a bump on the road somewhere along the line, or even if you're digital mature, there's something there for everybody, and the day promises to have that from a variety of sessions. I mentioned earlier, but I'll say it again: if you want to grab a ticket and make the most of our bursary while it's still left, you can do so at charitydigital.org.uk/be-more-digital. Thank you very much again, and we'll see you soon. Hi everybody, it's Chris here again, and with Teresa from Lightful, and this is our bonus section to the webinar that we've just had. We've still got some 20 to 30 questions to get to, so we'll try our best to answer them all, and we'll be adding this into the end. So here we go. The next question on the list before we end was, do you have any tips on using LinkedIn as a platform for charities?
Good question. I actually love LinkedIn. I mean, it's not my first channel to think of, but it's still a great platform, and we don't talk that much about it.
Yeah.
I think it's a great tool, but you need to have a clear purpose because it's more professional. It feels a little bit more corporate, but it can still make a great case of talking about partnerships you might have, or if you're hiring, and of course, it's a great channel when you want to find new people for your team. And it's also a great way to show a different perspective for your charity and how, for example, someone in a more professional background can find out more. There might be some volunteering opportunities or other things that you might not post on Instagram or Facebook. And it feels like the perfect channel to try it out.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we obviously see it in a very different way in charity digital, because it's often seen as the B2B, ABM type of style where you're getting people message you constantly, emailing you constantly. But I think what you said is totally right. There's a way to use it for even B2C charities. There's a corporate fundraising angle and sort of philanthropy angle there, and a way to present yourselves in a professional light in terms of the awards and success that you have as well, and gain a following from the professional community. Absolutely agree. Next question from Arnie. In terms of stories, how do others encourage their supporters to share their stories?
That's a good question. I think it depends on your organization and the types of stories that you have, because we know that in some cases with more sensitive topics, it's quite hard to get a story from a supporter, so you have to be more creative. But in general, it's useful to try and collect stories as much as possible on every opportunity. It doesn't have to be a campaign that you start looking for stories. You might be on an event, you might be on a volunteering activity, and you try and get some quotes, some ideas, some videos, and then just use them and keep them stored for whenever you want to use them. Or even get your team to actually share their thoughts on how they're really working towards making an impact. So there are many opportunities. It's more about thinking you have a storytelling mindset in your organization.
In the moment, I like
everywhere
that. It's those in the moment opportunities where you can make the most of something that's happening around you, which I think is, I think I was reading something about Google recently, and they were talking a lot about how they're pushing a lot of their UGC or user-generated content, to be more in the moment. So like the stuff they do on maps, for example, like uploading photos in restaurants.
You never know how you use it, so yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's stories are great for doing that sort of thing. Next question from Joy. Do you have any resources that would be helpful to improve storytelling with impact?
We've written a guide on Lightful a few months ago on storytelling that drives action. I remember it because I wrote that. So it's a bit of a shameless plug, but it was a topic that I'm really interested in, on how to tell stories, but actually make sure that you drive action. You make sure that you connect with the next steps. So I'm happy to share the link on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be really helpful. In terms of a charity who's really good at that, or Charity Water. And I don't know if you've seen any of their stuff. Shameless plug again. They're actually speaking about digital storytelling at our conference. So it'd be great to come down and see them in the flesh. But they have this great VR play that we covered in a recent article as well, essentially, where you follow the journey of a young girl as she's going to collect. She's on an 8-hour walk essentially to collect water, and then she comes all the way back and she does it on her own because she recently lost her family. And in terms of sort of immersive storytelling to elicit a donation and drive impact. I don't think I've seen anything better. I think I was looking up
That's
to experience it firsthand, and it was kind of like how much do you want after it? And I think checking something like that out would be really helpful. They are really good at stuff like that. Next question from Emma: is Lightful, Trello, and Grammarly payable?
I think all of them, and obviously Lightful, because I know more of, they have premium plans, but I want to make sure I include tools that are also having free versions. So it's not necessarily that you have to pay to use any of the tools we've talked about.
Yeah, I think you're right there. We use them all. All the ones you mentioned, we use. So for sure, I think Grammarly definitely has a payable one.
It's very handy. Yeah.
Grammarly, I don't know what to do with it. To be honest. I'd struggle. Excuse me. Next question from Laura. You spoke about creating content that an audience is more likely to engage with. What sort of content are people most likely to engage with?
I think that's a really good question, and it really depends on your organization. So I'd say a good way to find this out is to look at your previous posts and try and analyze, even on your own manually, what was the one that actually had more likes, comments, shares, or just interactions in general. Try and see what's working better, or if you like other organizations that might be similar to yours or completely different, what's something that makes some more engagement. And for example, there might be the use of GIFs, there might be more videos, or the creative use of copy. So it depends on the channel and the things you want to improve, to just have a bit of a research over there.
Yeah, test. If you're not using them already, test and learn. I think that's the best advice there, is give everything a go, see what works and see what doesn't. Like Teresa rightly said, I think the important thing that I always like to push when testing is don't give up quickly.
Yes, true.
Make sure you test over a prolonged period of time, 3, 4, 6 months, that sort of thing, and then it gives you more valuable insights, because if you drastically change your content, it'll take a while for your audience to catch up as well. Next question from Terry Ann. While I understand audience numbers don't matter, our trustees think they're important and want our numbers to grow quickly. Any advice for sort of relating everything you're saying back to a trustee, essentially?
It's not really easy to actually feel that you can grow really fast, for example, your followers. And it's always a challenge, because we feel, especially the stakeholders, when they're trying to check in on social media, if you don't really understand how it works, the first thing they look at is the followers. But it's good to remember, and it's really hard sometimes to educate everyone in the team to understand that it's not just the number of followers, because there are many cases, especially beyond the sector, that they just buy followers and they feel that I have a great channel because I have lots of followers. But if nobody engages with your posts, or if they don't really care about your content, then you wouldn't get more out of that. So especially in the charity sector, I'd say it's not just about the followers. Of course, if there are new supporters joining you, that's great. But you also want to make sure that the people who are following you, they're really engaging with your content.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that's absolutely hit the nail on the head. Next question from Leanne. Do you know a way of scheduling multiple images on Instagram? Hootsuite doesn't allow me to schedule more than one image. Good
question. I think there are several tools to schedule on Instagram, but it feels like it's not there as much as it could be, because Instagram is a bit tricky with scheduling. And I know a tool called Planoly that it's quite good on scheduling Instagram content, but there are many of them, and I feel that it's still a way to go with Instagram to allow everyone to make the most of it.
For years.
It's not really.
It hasn't changed. I remember using Hootsuite back in like 2013, 2014.
Sometimes you just need to use an app, or like try to get away.
You always have to. You schedule it online, and you have to go on your phone and then post it from your phone. I can't believe it's not going
the best.
Next question from Catherine. Can you recommend any tools for analysing your existing audiences on various platforms?
I think probably the safest way is to go through every channel and have a look at their insights, because it's the best way to look at your audience. For example, Facebook has great stats, Twitter, LinkedIn, even Instagram. If you set up your channel as a business account, you can still get the insights and understand your audience. And this is probably the safest way in terms of analytics to start from the platforms.
Yeah, totally. And on your very own platform, can you advertise with Lightful?
Not yet, but it's something that we've heard more lately, and it might be something out there. Who knows?
Give the people what they want.
You never know.
Next question from Siobhan. Can you use chatbots on Facebook Messenger?
Yes, chatbots are mostly relevant on Facebook Messenger. It's the platform that we usually see them. And it's a great case because everyone is on Facebook and you can just reach more people without necessarily having your team to reply to every single message.
Great. Next question from Fatima, actually 2 questions. I find that on social media, it's very hard to get donations during a specific campaign on Facebook. Do you have any advice?
I think this probably is one of the common challenges on social media, how to make it work for donations and fundraising. It feels that it's more like a long-term approach. How can you prepare your audience to know what to expect? Because we can't ask for someone all of a sudden to donate when we actually want that. It's more about preparing the ground, or make it like a long-term work. It's not just for a specific period. It's not like, for example, on direct giving or emails when you want to set the urgency. If they're not prepared for that, you probably want to test the ground first.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's buttering them up, for lack of a better term, isn't it? And let them get to know who you are as a brand before you start asking them to do stuff for you. And it's absolutely right. The second part of Fatima's question was, is it true that scheduled content generates less engagement?
That's an interesting question, and there were many articles about that through the years on whether you should use scheduling platforms or not. So as you can imagine, I was really interested because obviously working for Lightful, I wanted to have an answer to that. And there was an article that was very interesting. I think it was from Buffer some years ago. They did the research and they started analyzing the posts on a scheduling platform or when you do them natively. And they didn't find any change actually on the engagement, which was really interesting.
Okay.
So despite the rumors coming over that it might affect your engagement, it doesn't really change it.
Fake news.
Hope so.
Okay. Next question from Sophie. Any advice on running successful fundraising campaigns for charities doing more background instead of frontline work?
Interesting. I think it's more about showcasing, as we talk about storytelling with impact. How can you make sure that all the work that you're doing doesn't have to be on the front line where you have all the content and the opportunities, but how can you make sure that you get your team, for example, involved or the volunteers and find different ways of telling a story and show all the important work that you're still doing?
Exactly. Yeah. Next question from Kate. Were any of the sites you mentioned to use a content scheduling calendar free for a small charity? So funds like the So Many Are Tight.
Yes, all the tools that we've actually mentioned have a free plan, and it's actually quite handy, not just saying that it's free for the sake of it. You can still use it without paying anything.
Great. Katrina, do you have any examples of small charities that are punching above their weight and creating really engaging content? That's a really good question.
Great question. I think there are loads of charities that are very small teams and they don't even have a big budget to actually do that are great. That probably needs quite thinking to think of the best ones. I was talking recently to Action for Happiness, for example. They have thousands of followers and they have a massive audience, but they're like a very small team. Mm-hmm. And it's really impressive when you see how engaging they are because they're talking about positivity and how to spread happiness. You feel that there's a big team behind. And it's really interesting to see how you don't necessarily need a big team and budget to be engaging.
Yeah, I can't think of any, I can't recall any off the top of my head as well, but again, gives me a nice idea for an article.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one.
So watch this space. Next question for Sharon. Having watched the backlash that the RBL had recently on social media following a post about reducing funding, what are your suggestions for tackling negative reactions?
That's a really good story, and it feels like all charities should really be prepared about that because you never know what's happening. It might be something that's not directly relevant to your organization, but it's somehow linked, and we've seen lots of stories like that. I think it goes back to the idea of being prepared for like some sort of crisis comms, and you don't have to be a big team, but kind of like think ahead. What would you like to do if a negative story comes up? Do you want to have some sort of reaction? Do you want to stay silent and see what's next? It's more about checking with your team and the senior ones on the best way to approach something before it happens.
Yeah, another good example of that is London Zoo. They have to deal with a lot of bad press throughout the year, so I would check them out when you get a second, see how they deal with it. Maybe try and speak to somebody there. Next question from. Next question. In relation to your communities over public broadcasting trend, how would you recommend this is done for an international NGO with multiple language barriers, time zone?
That's a really good question. I think it probably needs more coordination with the different teams and the different departments. You might need different Facebook groups or any other smaller communities, WhatsApp groups, anything that makes sense, but it probably has to be more local in that case, because you can have a community with millions of people, of course, to manage.
Yeah, you're probably better off having...
Make it more local so that people feel that it's more relevant to them.
Exactly. Like Twitter pages for that particular charity in that area, for example, or groups, exactly. Totally agree. Next question from Laura. Our office is very small. One person handles all social media and websites, as well as HR, office management, organisation of all volunteers, field workers. How do you carve out time? And sort of what sort of strategy should we look into?
I know that challenge because we tend to work with many small charities, so I definitely understand it's really hard. And that's why we've mentioned all the things we've discussed, that it's not feasible to do all the things and all the tactics. Yeah. But in that case, it's more about being very strategic with your time and be very strict with your schedule, because social media can be really distracting. So if you only have half an hour a week, say I'm going to schedule my posts and then I'm going to spend 10 more minutes at some point over the week to monitor and reply. So it doesn't have to be a full-time job if you're doing too many things. It's just making sure that you do what's needed to just keep it going.
Yeah, I think we're a relatively small team as well, and we take a similar sort of stand. We block out a certain amount of time a year to go through the planning and strategy for that year. And then we dedicate specific time allotments throughout the day, and we have people help us to pitch in where and when they can. But a lot of like what Teresa said earlier, like plan your day. I'm going to spend from 9 till 10 in the morning doing X, Y, Z, and then maybe 15 minutes on an evening going through the comments and whatnot. I think that's probably the best way. Next question from Simon. What strategies might you recommend to grow your audience?
That's a good question. I think it's more about being consistent, and it's usually my answer to this because it sounds very general, but if you think of it with social media, we might get excited with one channel, or we might see something trending and then get excited, but it's also easy to forget that and let the channel just stay on its own silent. And it's more about setting a plan, as we've said, getting your time to schedule some posts to show that you're active, that you're really interested in growing your channel, and you're trying new ideas, you test and learn and trying to find what's working for you.
Totally. Next question, and I think we might have answered this with our answer to a different yet similar question. How do you use social media to target new countries where you've not previously been running activity, for example, Australia or the United States?
I feel this is probably quite a big challenge, because if you have your audience, for example, UK focused, then you want to reach a completely new audience. And that might be a case of what we discussed about partnerships or trying to find some sort of connection. How can you make more sense to those who know nothing about you? Yeah. So you need a starting point.
Yeah, it's been everything, isn't it? Storytelling with partnerships, with relevant accounts. And relevant
there are too many things for that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways I think you can go about that, but it's no small project for sure. Next question from Kate. Apart from Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, is there any other platforms that charities should be on? Also, what's your tag so we can follow you?
Well, my personal account is Teresa Licia, and of course you can also follow Lightful. And except for that, just answer the most important stuff first. I think there are too many channels, and we've also mentioned LinkedIn, which is also quite handy, but it also gets to the point of thinking, do you want to be on every single channel? Do you have the time? If you have the time, of course, you can be on all of them, but it's usually suggested to pick 2-3 channels that make more sense for your organization and your supporters and the age range that they might have, and try to be more consistent in them, because it's really hard to be active on 5-6 channels.
Yeah.
It's always a challenge.
Yeah, the other one we mentioned is TikTok, but then
Yes.
that's a completely different ball game if you want to be sort of present on there as well. So yeah, I think like Teresa said, if you've got the time, do it. But no,
Feel free. Yes.
I'll pick the ones that your audience is at. Next question from Gavin. If you have a very limited social media resource capacity, what would you consider a key priority objective for a charity?
I think if you, the most common one is grow your followers, and it's also the case, as I've said, grow your followers, but also maintain your engagement. You want to grow your reach if possible, or at least to keep it consistent. And the ideal scenario is to make sure that people like your posts enough to leave comments and share and find more interested in that and to keep it growing.
Yep. And next question. What would you recommend for a charity that funds research into a cure for an illness with no tangible impact at present? The work is vital, but it's unlikely to provide a cure for many years, and all of our funding goes into this research.
An interesting challenge. I'd say in that case, you probably want to focus and highlight how this would still make an impact in the future. Of course, it's not easy when it's not something tangible that you can say that with £10 you can really make a difference today. Yeah. But it's still about highlighting the long-term value and how that could be really groundbreaking in the future. So it's not just thinking of the short-term wins. You want to focus on being consistent on your channels, updating on the progress, and sharing interesting stories that might be changing.
That's the word, isn't it? Stories. It's all about storytelling, and I think that's what you need to focus on. Obviously, what you've got going on there is going to be really beneficial in the long run. But that in itself is a story, and you can start, spinning that yarn about this is what we're doing, this is where we came from, this is where we're going, and there's a lot of strands that spin off that as well. So it's about telling the story essentially. Next question. We're getting close to the end now. We've got a few questions left. Are there any benchmarks for how much time or effort should be spent on social relative to the size of the charity?
I don't think I've seen benchmarks on the time you spend based on the size of the charity, which would be quite interesting. But I guess it also depends on the team. So if you have a full-time social media manager, then obviously you spend more time. But if you have limited capacity, then of course you just spend, for example, an hour a week and you're still happy trying to do your best. So you don't need to feel that I need to spend more time. It's just being a little bit smarter with that.
Big smart, not harder. Sound advice. Next question from Beth is Twitter just preaching to your own audience and not reaching new people?
I'd say Twitter is quite the opposite, and it's probably the only channel that you have the opportunity to reach new people. Because if you keep an eye on the hashtags, there might be some of them trending, or there are opportunities like hashtags like Charity Tuesday. It's trending every Tuesday, and charities have a great opportunity to find other people who are interested in charitable causes. So it's probably the channel that you have more opportunities to reach more people. And we see many charities who just kind of get viral because they jump on a trend or something that's really big happening. And you just need to find the relevance and the connection.
For sure. Next question from Terry Ann. What are your thoughts on celebrity ambassadors for charities? We're thinking of working with some influencers to increase our audience size.
It's definitely a good idea. And if you have the connections and the ambassadors and the celebrities who are interested in supporting your work, then that's always a great case because they have a big audience, a big influence, and you want to make the most of it. But I'd say what's important is to also have some sort of guidelines in terms of your brand, your messaging, to make sure that this person resonates with your values and it doesn't really sidetrack.
For sure. And our very last question, and probably one to finish on, a good one to finish on, that is. Can you recommend a tool for content calendaring as opposed to scheduling?
Well, I've mentioned Lightful. Hopefully I made it clear on that side. But of course, it's not just Lightful. It was just a case of having also a free option. But there are many tools. And as we've said, even Twitter has its own free tool if you just want to schedule content. And we're happy to have more ideas, and there should be more posts presenting all the cases. I think there was one on Charity Digital a few months ago.
Probably.
That there was cases of all the tools that you can find.
No, we do cover a lot.
Yes.
We did talk a little more social media. Well, that's it. We've rattled through all the questions. Thank you very much for hanging around and hope you enjoyed the bonus recording. See you next time.